Hello! In this video, I will be describing the different ways that people can get trapped behind a cave sump. I will give you the tools to classify the situations. This topology will include historical examples, so you can research further into how the patients were rescued. At the end, I will include a link to the Sump Rescue database where you can read more. Let's start with the definition of a sump. A sump is a water-filled cave passage with at least two exits, at least one of which is in dry cave. In order to show the many types of problems involved, I'm also going to consider man-made tunnels. Note that it is common for cave explorers to pass through several sumps. Rescues of persons trapped on the other side of a sump are one of the most difficult types of cave rescues. The most famous was the 2018 rescue of the Thai soccer team trapped in Tham Luang Cave. Water-filled passages make it hard to access the patients, and they usually don't have the skills or equipment to scuba dive out. What's more, the water may be rising and/or they may be in a small location with no fresh air. In order to help analyze particular sump entrapments, we use the three variables of passage, equipment, and patient, or PEP. PEP describes the problem, which will help guide us to potential solutions. The passage variable describes what happened to physically block the patients from exiting the cave. It is usually an issue of permanent versus temporary sumps, but has many interesting variations. The equipment variable describes problems with the patient's personal equipment. As an example, their scuba gear isn't working. Lastly, the patient variable is used to look for issues with the patients themselves. For example, a facial injury might prevent their use of standard scuba equipment. Since the passage is usually the most obvious factor, I'll divide up the remainder of the presentation by major passage issues and talk about how equipment and patient issues interact with them. Temporary sumps are the most common cause of sump entrapments. Most commonly, a rainstorm raised the water level in a cave, which blocked a tunnel that people in the cave needed to use to exit the cave. Tham Luang is the most famous example. The first successful sump rescue happened in 1907 when a freak rainstorm flooded an Australian gold mine, trapping a miner for several days. He was kept supplied by early hard hat divers. There are other causes to consider, though. Near the coast, a rising tide may block a tunnel. Ships that flip upside down effectively present a sump for sailors trapped in an air pocket at the bottom, now top, of the ship. There's also the 2001 Queecrig mine disaster, where miners accidentally broke into another flooded mine, which flooded parts of their own mine and prevented them from exiting. When you have a passage that flooded, it tells you a lot about the equipment and the patient variables. You can safely assume the trapped party doesn't have scuba equipment. You can also assume the patients are not cave divers and that their only medical issues are hypothermia and hunger. There is an interesting exception, though. In 2018, sump divers exploring Cueva de la Peña Colorado in Mexico were separated from their scuba equipment by a rainstorm which flooded a passage between them and where they had left it. They are separated from their equipment for 69 hours until the water went back down. Let's now talk about permanent sumps. Even though the patient passed through the sump when the water was high, there are several things about the passage that could prevent a return trip. We need to continue to look at all three variables. When a water-filled passage is very short, it's not uncommon for cavers to pass through it without any scuba equipment. This type of passage is called a duck under. Sometimes there is more than one way to go, and a caver will pop up into a dry area that no one knew about. This has happened to me, and it's very disconcerting. The most famous occurrence happened in 1982 in Dido's Cave in England. In these events, the patient usually has no scuba equipment, no diving experience, and absolutely no intent of ducking back into the passage and hoping to find the right way to go. There's a similar situation where the patient does have dive gear and knows how to dive, but not how to cave dive. The patient decided to scuba dive into a cave and is one of the lucky few who got lost but somehow managed to pop up into an air bell. He wisely stays there and waits for a rescue. Examples include Acarite Cave in Brazil in 1991 and Nickajack Lake Cave in the US in 1992. When a cave diver is involved, the most common issue is a problem with the guideline. The patient has a full set of diving gear and is trained and healthy. The patient silted out the passage and broke the guideline and now has no way of finding the way home. Cave divers are trained to repair guidelines, both low visibility and dwindling breathing gas reserves. This doesn't always work. patient has to turn around and head further into the cave to a dry area to wait for the visibility to improve and someone to repair the line. Examples include Sapiqueta Cave in Mallorca in 2017 and the Millpond Cave in the US in 2019. Sometimes there's so much underwater debris that the passage becomes blocked. As the patient went up or down an underwater slope, mud or gravel got dislodged, which slid down the slope and choked off a restriction. The only solution is underwater digging, which is very difficult. Let's now look at some equipment issues. Cold caves require dry suits, which have their own vulnerabilities. There's frequently no alternative to wearing a dry suit in the dry cave beyond or between sumps. The dry suit may get torn, or the zipper may be broken or become too dirty to reclose. In some cold sumps, the swim home takes so long that it should not be started with a flooded dry suit. The patient is stuck waiting for in-cave dry suit repair. In a rare variation, the dry suit itself is fine, but something happened to the suit gas or electrical heating system which renders the dive too cold to do. There is no history of these incidents requiring a rescue, but there have been several near misses. Other near misses have resulted from scuba regulator problems. The regulators worked fine on the way into the cave, but past the sump, one of a diver's two regulators got clogged with mud or damaged, and he or she can't repair it. This raises a dilemma. The diver still has one working regulator that is sufficient to exit the cave, but there's no redundancy. If this happened underwater, the diver would just turn the dive and hope a second problem didn't happen. In this case, though, the diver is somewhat safe in the dry area. Does the diver chance it with the one regulator, or wait for a rescue? There are a few reasons the patient could be the factor preventing them from exiting the cave. For example, the patient could have fallen and broken some bones or hurt his or her head or spine. The patient needs help getting back to the water, possibly through some very technical terrain. This has never happened, but it is the worst case scenario that everyone in the rescue community tries to train for. In a lesser variation, the patient is healthy, for now, but physically wedged in a crack or otherwise unable to get back to the water. This almost happened to me, where my buddy and I were exploring without climbing gear beyond a sump, and I descended into a pit to explore and almost couldn't climb back out. Those are the major types of sump entrapments. As you have seen, using the variables of passage, equipment, and patient allows you to categorize the incident and match it to prior examples. You can read more in the incident database on my Sump Rescue website. The community has also collected its Sump Rescue knowledge into a free manual, which you can also find there. Thank you.